Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are standing on the edge of a cliff, really, looking down at a period of history that moves so fast it almost gives you whiplash.
It really does.
We're talking about the scramble for Africa.
Yeah.
But, we aren't just doing the standard textbook summary. We're going to look at the mechanics of how it all started.
And it really is a scramble. Usually you see historical eras kind of drift into one another, right? Like the seasons changing. But this is an explosion. It's a geopolitical sprint.
Exactly. I want to start with a visual to ground us. I know this is audio, but, try to picture two maps of Africa in your head. The first one's from around 1880. If you look at that map, what do you see?
Well, mostly, you see, Africa. In 1880, the European presence is, it's barely there. It's a footnote.
Right.
You've got the Portuguese clinging to the coast in Angola and Mozambique. And look, they'd been there for centuries, but they hadn't really gone inland.
They were just trading posts, mostly.
Yeah. Mostly, yeah. Then you have the French holding on to Algeria up north. And way down south, you have the British with the Cape Colony. But that's kind of it. Maybe a few other little posts dotted along the edge, like breadcrumbs.
So the vast majority of the continent is?
It's under indigenous rule, about 90% of it. It's uncolored by European flags on the map.
Okay, so hold that image in your mind. Now, swap that map for one from 1914, just 34 years later. That's barely a generation.
It's a completely different world. It's unrecognizable. The entire continent looks like a stained glass window that someone dropped and then glued back together.
Wow, that's a good way to put it.
It's been carved up, colored in, and divided among the European powers. Every inch of it, except for Ethiopia and, Liberia, is under formal European control.
And that is the central mystery we are unpacking today. How do you go from barely there to total domination in, roughly 20 years? How does an entire continent get carved up that quickly?
Yeah. And the answer isn't just about armies marching into the jungle, though, that did happen later. The starting gun wasn't a cannon shot. It was the scratch of a pen.
It's about this concept you hear of the map by treaty.
The paper partition. Precisely. A lot of this initial scramble didn't happen on the ground in Africa. It happened in these plush conference rooms in Berlin and Paris and London.
Because just diplomats.
It's diplomats drawing lines on maps that, frankly, often didn't reflect reality at all. They were trading territories they'd never seen based on treaties with chiefs who often had no idea what they were actually signing.
So today's mission, our mission for this deep dive, is to find that starting gun. Because we often think of the scramble as this single monolithic event, but our sources really point out that it started with very specific and actually unconnected crises.
That's the key. They weren't connected at first.
Right. So we're going to look at the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the north, specifically in Tunisia and Egypt, and then we'll turn to the very strange, singular ambition of a Belgian king in the Congo.
It's a story of debt, diplomacy, and a whole lot of deception.
And the characters are just unbelievable. We've got bankrupt playboy rulers, fanatical religious uprisings. We have explorers who travel with cases of champagne, and a king who runs a colony like it's his own private holding company.
It sounds like fiction, but it's all true.
It does. So grab your pith helmet, metaphorically speaking, of course, and let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so to get this started, we have to begin in the north. To really understand why Europe suddenly got so obsessive about Africa in the 1880s, we have to look at something called the Eastern Question.
Right, the Eastern Question. This was the great migraine of 19th century diplomacy.
A constant headache.
Constant headache. And it basically boils down to one simple question. What in the world do we do with the Ottoman Empire?
The famous sick man of Europe.
Exactly. The Ottoman Empire was crumbling. It had once stretched all around the Mediterranean, controlling the Balkans, Turkey, the Middle East, all of North Africa. But by the late 1800s, it was losing its grip. It was financially insolvent, militarily weak. And the great powers of Europe, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Austria, were like vultures circling a dying animal.
But they were very polite vultures, right? They were terrified of upsetting the balance of power.
That's the absolute key context here. It's this delicate balance. If Russia took a bite out of the Ottoman Empire, say, by taking Constantinople, which they always wanted, Britain would have a panic attack about their trade routes to India.
And if Britain took something?
France would get jealous and demand a piece for themselves. It was a domino effect. If one piece on the board moves, the whole table shakes. And this all really comes to a head at the Congress of Berlin in 1878.
This was, what, the diplomatic Super Bowl of the century? You have all the big names there, Disraeli from Britain, Waddington from France, and presiding over it all, the Iron Chancellor himself, Otto von Bismarck of Germany.
Bismarck is fascinating here. He's playing the role of the honest broker. Now, you have to get inside Bismarck's mindset. Germany didn't really want African colonies at this point. Bismarck famously said, "My map of Africa lies in Europe."
What did he mean by that?
He meant his one and only priority was German security on the European continent. Germany had just unified in 1871 after soundly beating France in a major war.
The Franco-Prussian War.
Right. And they took the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine. France was humiliated, bitter, and, openly dreaming of revenge. Bismarck's constant nightmare was a French war of vengeance.
So he needs to distract them, give them something else to think about.
Exactly. He needs to give France a hobby, a very absorbing, expensive hobby. He thought, if I can encourage France to go build an empire in Africa, maybe they'll forget about the Rhine. Maybe they'll use up their military energy and their budget-chasing tribes in the desert instead of plotting to retake Alsace.
So he's basically dangling a shiny object in front of them.
Precisely. And that shiny object was Tunisia.
There's this incredible quote from Bismarck regarding Tunisia. He tells the French ambassador, "The Tunisian pear is ripe, and the time has come for you to pick it."
I mean, he was practically gift-wrapping it for them. At the Congress of Berlin, a deal was struck behind closed doors. It was classic horse trading. Britain was given the green light to occupy Cyprus to protect its interests in the Eastern Med against Russia.
And in exchange for that?
In exchange, Britain gave France the nod, the green light, to take Tunisia whenever they felt like it.
It's just amazing how casual this all was. Britain gets Cyprus, France gets Tunisia, and, nobody bothers to ask the people living in Cyprus or Tunisia what they think about it.
Or the Italians. That's the other layer of drama here. Italy was absolutely furious.
Because Tunisia's so close to them geographically.
It's right across the water from Sicily. There were way more Italian immigrants living in Tunisia than French ones. Italy looked at Tunisia and thought it was their natural backyard. It was supposed to be their first colony.
But Bismarck didn't care about Italy.
Not really. He had this incredibly cutting insult about Italy. He told the French ambassador, "The Italians have a big appetite, but poor teeth." He knew Italy just wasn't strong enough to stop France.
Ouch. So the diplomatic stage is set. France has the green light. But on the ground in Tunisia, things are, they're falling apart all on their own.
Yes. And here we have to talk about the ruler of Tunisia, the Bey. His name was Mohammed al-Sadok. Now, technically, he's an Ottoman governor, but practically speaking, he's an independent monarch.
And financially?
Financially, he is a complete and utter disaster.
This brings us to what the historians have called the golden age of Islamic insolvency.
It's a tragic cycle that we see repeated in Egypt and elsewhere. The Tunisian government, led by a prime minister named Kazandar, was breathtakingly corrupt. But they also had this desire to modernize. They looked at Europe and saw paved roads, telegraphs, modern armies, beautiful palaces. They wanted all of that for Tunisia.
But they didn't have the economy to support it.
Not even close. They didn't have the tax base. So they did what many still do today. They borrowed from Europe. And this wasn't like going to the World Bank for a sensible mortgage. These were predatory, loan shark-level loans.
Can you give us an example of how bad the terms actually were?
I mean, it was criminal. The European bankers knew the risk was high, so they charged massive interest rates and these huge upfront commissions. There was one famous loan where the Tunisian state officially borrowed 35 million francs.
Okay.
But after the bankers in Paris took their cut and the corrupt officials in Tunis took their bribes, only about 5 million francs actually reached the Tunisian treasury.
That is insane. So they are paying interest on 35 million, but they only ever received 5 million.
Yes. And to pay the interest on that phantom debt, they had to squeeze the peasants, the fellahin, with higher and higher taxes. They doubled the main poll tax. This caused famine, unrest, misery. The country was literally eating itself alive to pay foreign bankers for money it never even thought.
And eventually the whole house of cards collapses.
Yeah, inevitably. In 1869, Tunisia effectively declared bankruptcy.
And when a country goes bankrupt in the 19th century, the liquidators move in.
An international financial commission took control. So you basically had French, British, and Italian accountants who took over the entire Tunisian budget. And their only job, their only mandate, was to make sure the bondholders in Europe got paid. They didn't care if the Tunisian people starved.
So the country is already, in a way, being run by European accountants.
No.
But France hasn't invaded yet. What was the trigger for the actual military takeover?
Well, before the soldiers came the consuls, and this is one of the most entertaining parts of the source material. You had the French consul, a man named Roustan, and the Italian consul, Macchio. And they were fighting a personal war for influence in the city of Tunis.
This is what's called the Consular War. And it wasn't just about politics, was it? It sounds more like a soap opera.
It was deeply personal. It really was. Roustan, the Frenchman, had a mistress, a Madame Moussali, and she was essentially the first lady of the French consulate, wielding a lot of influence. So the Italian consul, Macchio, wanting to get back at Roustan, allegedly started a relationship with the wife of Madame Moussali's brother.
Oh my goodness. It's like the Real Housewives of the Ottoman Empire.
It really was. They were spying on each other. They were trying to sabotage each other's telegraph lines. They were fighting over who got the concession to build a railway. Macchio was trying to block French companies from building a line to the coast. Roustan was furious. He was writing these frantic letters back to Paris saying, if we don't act now, Italy is going to take Tunisia right from under our noses.
So France decides they need to move. The pair was rife, as Bismarck had said. But they still needed a pretext, right? You can't just invade because of a railway dispute or a mistress.
So they found one. They found the Crumiers. The Crumiers were a tribe living on the border between Algeria, which was already French, and Tunisia. And there were some minor skirmishes. The Crumiers raided across the border.
Which is a pretty common thing, right?
It happened all the time in that region. It was not a big deal. But France seized on it. They claimed the Crumiers were a grave threat to the security of Algeria.
It's the classic excuse. We're just here to restore order.
The timeless excuse. In April 1881, an army of 35,000 French troops crossed the border. It was a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The Bey's little army couldn't do anything. It was a walkover. On May 1st, they marched to the Bardo Palace.
And this is the moment of the map by treaty, the real deal.
This is the Treaty of the Bardo. The French general, Bréart, marched into the Bey's palace with an armed escort. He slammed the treaty down on the table and gave the Bey 2 hours to sign it.
2 hours. 2 hours to sign away his entire country.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The Bey looked at it, looked at the soldiers, and realized he had absolutely no choice. He signed. But the treaty itself is very interesting. It didn't make Tunisia a colony. It established a protectorate.
Let's unpack that term, because we see it a lot. How is a protectorate different from a colony?
This is a crucial distinction in the Scramble. France didn't annex Tunisia outright. They didn't depose the Bey. He stayed on the throne as a figurehead. He kept his palace, he kept his titles, his servants.
So it looks independent.
It looks independent, but the treaty gave France total control of the army, total control of foreign affairs, and it placed a French resident general alongside the Bey to manage the finances. It's a puppet government.
So you get all the profit of a colony without the administrative headache.
It became the model for the rest of the Scramble. Why conquer and have to pay for the entire administration when you can just protect the existing ruler and extract the wealth? It's cheaper, and it looks slightly better diplomatically.
So Tunisia falls, and this must have sent shockwaves through North Africa. Because right next door, well, a bit further east, is the big prize, the real prize, Egypt.
Egypt is a different beast entirely. If Tunisia was a pear, as Bismarck said, then Egypt was the whole orchard.
Why was Egypt so much more important?
2 words: Suez Canal.
The game changer.
The canal opened in 1869, and it completely revolutionized global trade. Before the canal, if you wanted to get from London to India, the absolute jewel in the British crown, you had to sail all the way around Africa. It took months.
An enormous journey.
Enormous. With the canal, you cut through the Mediterranean, down the Red Sea, and you're there in a matter of weeks.
It was the jugular vein of the British Empire.
Exactly. Something like 80% of the shipping going through the canal was British. But the irony is, the British hated the idea of the canal at first. They fought against it. They thought it was a French plot.
I mean, it was kind of a French plot, wasn't it? Ferdinand de Lesseps, a Frenchman, built it.
He did. And the Khedive of Egypt, Ismail, he loved it. Ismail is another one of these fascinating characters. He wanted Egypt to be part of Europe. He famously said, "My country is no longer in Africa. We are now part of Europe."
And he spent like it.
Oh, he modernized everything. Railways, telegraphs. He built the Opera House in Cairo. He even commissioned Verdi to write the opera Aida for its opening.
But all that modernization costs a lot of money.
And Ismail spent money like water. He drove the national debt from about £4 million when he took over to 90 million. It was the Tunisian story all over again, but on a much, much bigger scale. The vultures, the European bankers were circling.
And then comes the crash.
By 1875, Ismail is completely desperate. He's about to default on the loans. He's looking at his assets and realizes the only really valuable thing he has left are his shares in the Suez Canal Company. He owns about 44% of the canal.
And he puts them up for sale.
He does. And the French wanted to buy them, but their government was hesitating. They were bickering over the price. The British Prime Minister at the time, Benjamin Disraeli, did not hesitate for a second.
This is a great story. Disraeli didn't even go to Parliament for the money, right?
No, because Parliament was in recess. He went to his friend, Baron Lionel de Rothschild, over dinner. He asked for £4 million. Rothschild supposedly just asked him, "What is your security?"
And Disraeli says,
"The British government." And Rothschild just said, "You shall have it."
I love the note Disraeli sent to Queen Victoria afterwards. "It is settled. You have it, madam." Just so triumphant.
It's a pivotal moment. The British government, overnight, became the largest single shareholder in its own imperial lifeline. Britain had now bought its way into Egypt.
But owning shares doesn't fix the underlying Egyptian economy.
Not at all. It was a Band-Aid on a gaping bullet wound. Egypt went bankrupt a year later, in 1876. And this led to something called dual control.
What was that?
Britain and France basically seized the Egyptian treasury. They sent in their own financial controllers, more accountants who had one job and one job only, ensure the debt is paid to the European bondholders.
And this is where the human cost just gets staggering. They prioritized paying foreign banks over feeding the Egyptian population.
They starved the country of investment, they cut the army's pay to the bone, they taxed the peasants into oblivion. There were reports of people starving in the villages while ships full of Egyptian grain were being exported to pay the debt. Naturally, this caused a backlash. You can't squeeze a population that hard without some kind of reaction.
Enter Arabi Pasha.
Colonel Ahmed Arabi. He was an Egyptian army officer, but crucially, he was a native Egyptian. You have to remember, the ruling class in Egypt was Turkish Circassian. They spoke Turkish at court. They looked down on the native fellahin, the peasants. Arabi started a movement with a very simple, very powerful slogan: Egypt for the Egyptians.
It sounds like one of the first modern nationalist movements in the Arab world.
It really was. It was anti-European for sure, but it was also anti-Turk. It was about national dignity, and it terrified the Europeans. They didn't see Arabi as a patriot. They saw him as a dangerous radical who might cut off the canal or, even worse, default on the debt.
So tensions are rising. It's 1882.
Yeah.
Arabi has effectively taken control of the government. The Khedive is just a puppet at this point, and Britain and France are panicking.
France actually wanted to intervene, but their government collapsed due to some internal political squabble. So Britain, led by the Prime Minister William Gladstone, was left holding the bag.
And Gladstone is so interesting here because he was a liberal. He hated imperialism. He campaigned against Disraeli's expansionist policies. And yet
he's the one who authorizes the invasion. It just shows the power of the man on the spot. There were some anti-foreign riots in Alexandria. Europeans were killed. The British admiral offshore claimed his ships were being threatened by Egyptian fortifications. He asked London for permission to bombard the city.
And he got it.
The bombardment of Alexandria in July 1882 was brutal. It flattened large parts of the city. Then the British army landed, marched inland, and just completely destroyed Arabi's army at the Battle of Tel el-Kebir. It wasn't even close. The British had modern artillery. They had early machine guns. Arabi's forces were just crushed.
And just like that, Britain owns Egypt.
Well, they claimed it was temporary. This is the concept of the veiled protectorate. Gladstone said, "We're just here to restore order. We are supporting the Khedive against these rebels. We'll leave as soon as things are stable."
Spoiler alert. They didn't leave for over 70 years.
Right. They stayed until the 1950s. And the occupation of Egypt changed everything. It completely poisoned relations between Britain and France. France felt cheated. They built the canal. They had all the cultural influence, and now Britain held the keys. This rivalry is what really kicks the scramble into high gear. France starts grabbing territory in West Africa just to spite Britain.
So when you take Egypt, you assume you're getting all of Egypt's territory. But Egypt had its own empire to the south, in the Sudan.
Ah, the Sudan. If Egypt was the prize, the Sudan was the disaster that came with it. It's a massive, incredibly harsh territory, deserts in the north, vast swamps in the south. Egypt had conquered it decades earlier, mostly to hunt for slaves and gold.
And the Sudanese people were not happy about this arrangement.
To put it mildly, no. They viewed the Egyptians, the Turks as they called them, as corrupt, brutal, and not even very good Muslims. And into this absolute powder keg stepped a man named Muhammad Ahmed. He proclaimed himself the Mahdi.
The expected one.
Yes, a messianic figure from Islamic prophecy. He preached a purification of Islam and a holy war, a jihad, to drive out the infidels, which in this case meant the Egyptians and their new European advisors.
And this wasn't just a small rebellion. This was a tidal wave of an uprising.
It swept across the Sudan. The British in Cairo, they didn't take it seriously at first. They thought it was just another tribal revolt. They let the Egyptians send an army down there to deal with it, led by a retired British officer named William Hicks Pasha.
What happened to Hicks?
It was a complete catastrophe. Hicks's army of 10,000 men was marched deep into the desert, misled by their own guides. They ran out of water. They were completely demoralized. And the Mahdist forces surrounded them and absolutely annihilated them. Almost no one survived to tell the tale.
So now Britain has a massive problem. They occupy Egypt. Egypt officially owns Sudan, but Sudan is on fire and out of control. Gladstone, who already didn't want Egypt, definitely doesn't want the Sudan.
It's a money pit and a graveyard in his eyes. He sees no strategic value there, so he makes the decision to evacuate, cut the losses, pull out the remaining Egyptian garrisons and civilians, and just leave the Sudan to the Mahdi. But to do that, he needs a man to lead the evacuation.
And he picks the worst possible man for that specific job. Or maybe the best, depending on how you look at it. General Charles Gordon.
Chinese Gordon. He is one of the most singular, eccentric figures in Victorian history. You almost can't invent a character like him.
Paint a picture of him for us. What was he like?
He was a hero of the empire, famous for leading armies in China, which is where the nickname came from. But he was also deeply, deeply eccentric. He was a religious fanatic who walked around with a Bible in one hand and a little cane in the other. He claimed to have found the exact location of the Garden of Eden in the Seychelles. He chain-smoked cigarettes. He was known for these wild, unpredictable mood swings.
But he knew the Sudan.
Yeah.
That was the key, right?
He knew it intimately. He had actually been the governor of the Sudan for Egypt before, and he'd spent his time there vigorously fighting the slave trade. He loved the place. He felt this deep, almost mystical connection to the people.
And that was the problem. You don't send a man with a messiah complex on a mission to evacuate a country. You send him on that mission, he's going to try and save it.
Exactly. Gordon goes to Khartoum, which was the capital of Sudan, with very clear orders, get the Egyptians out. But as soon as he arrives, he completely changes his mind. He looks at the people there who are terrified of the Mahdi, and his ego, his sense of destiny, it all kicks in. He decides to stay. He convinces himself he can smash the Mahdi with just his presence and a handful of troops.
He goes completely rogue.
He goes rogue. He starts sending these defiant telegrams back to London. And he gets himself besieged in Khartoum. The Mahdi's forces surround the city, cutting it off from the world.
And this becomes a massive media event back in Britain. Gordon of Khartoum, the lonely hero standing against the barbarian hordes.
Oh, the public pressure on Gladstone was immense. Queen Victoria was sending him furious letters, asking why Gordon was being abandoned. The newspapers were screaming, "Save Gordon," every single day. Finally, reluctantly, Gladstone caves and sends a relief expedition up the Nile. It's a race against time.
But they were too slow.
They were just too slow. The relief column arrived in sight of Khartoum on January 28, 1885. The soldiers looked through their telescopes, expecting to see the Egyptian flag still flying over the palace. Instead, they saw the city was in ruins. They were 2 days late.
The Mahdists had stormed the city.
Yes. On the morning of January 26th, the defenses had finally collapsed.
And what happened to Gordon?
There are a lot of myths about his death, him fighting to the last, but the most likely story is that he simply walked out onto the steps of the palace in his white uniform to face the invaders, and he was speared to death. His head was cut off, wrapped in a cloth, and presented to the Mahdi as a trophy.
It was a massive humiliation for the British Empire.
It was a profound shock. But interestingly, they didn't strike back immediately. They actually withdrew. They pulled back to the Egyptian border. The Mahdist state survived for another decade. It proved that this European expansion wasn't always a straight line of easy victories. It was messy, it was reactive, and sometimes it failed.
So we've got the North completely exploding. We've got Britain and France at each other's throats over Egypt. But while all the great powers are staring at the Mediterranean, something very, very strange is happening in the middle of the continent, down in the Congo.
This is where the story gets really bizarre, because so far we've been talking about nations, Britain, France, Germany. In the Congo, we are talking about a man, one single man.
King Leopold II of Belgium.
Leopold is. He's quite a character. He was the king of this small, neutral country. And, Belgium was prosperous, it was industrialized, but it was boring. And Leopold was profoundly bored.
He had that famous quote, he called Belgium a small country, small people.
He did. He was obsessed with making money and finding a colony for himself. He spent years looking at the Philippines, at Fiji, at parts of Vietnam. He tried to buy colonies like you'd buy a used car, but nobody was selling.
And the Belgian people, the government, they didn't want a colony.
The Belgian parliament was very clear. They said, we are a small, neutral country. Colonies are expensive. They're a headache. We don't want one. So Leopold had this realization. If the country won't get me a colony, I will get one for myself.
He decides to operate as a private citizen, a kind of corporate king.
Exactly. And his strategy was a mixture of absolute brilliance and total bottomless cynicism. He realized that if he said, I want to go to Africa to exploit it for profit, everyone would stop him. The British, the French, they would never let the king of a small country take a massive chunk of land for himself.
So he needs a mask, a respectable cover story.
He needs a philanthropic mask. So in 1876, he convened the Brussels Geographical Conference. He invited all these famous explorers, scientists, humanitarians to his palace. He charmed them all.
What was the pitch? What did he tell them?
He claimed his goal was purely scientific and humanitarian. He said he wanted to open up the dark interior of Africa to trade, to science, and this was the crucial part, to end the Arab slave trade that was still ravaging Central Africa.
And who could possibly argue with that?
Exactly. It was the perfect cover. He created an organization called the Association Internationale Africaine, AIA. It sounded like a charity, like the Red Cross. Its flag was a single gold star on a blue background, symbolizing the light of civilization being brought into the African darkness. But it was a complete shell organization. It was a front for Leopold.
But he needed a man on the ground, right? He's a king. He can't go hacking through the jungle himself.
So he hires the most famous and maybe most ruthless explorer of the age, Henry Morton Stanley.
Dr. Livingstone, I presume.
That's the guy. But Stanley was the polar opposite of Livingstone. Livingstone was a missionary, a wanderer. Stanley was a bulldozer. The local Africans gave him a nickname, Bula Matari, the breaker of rocks. He was brutal, efficient, and famously American-financed on his first trip.
And Leopold recruits him in secret, is that right?
Yes. He intercepted him in Marseille right after Stanley had completed his epic journey crossing the continent. The British government had ignored Stanley's proposals to develop the Congo, but Leopold listened very carefully. He essentially hired Stanley as his mercenary CEO.
And what was the job description? What did Leopold tell him to do?
Go back to the Congo. Build a road around the unnavigable cataracts of the lower river. Launch steamboats on the vast upper river. And most importantly, sign treaties.
Treaties with whom?
With any and all of the local chiefs he could find. Stanley traveled up the river with cases of gin, bolts of bright red cloth, and various trinkets. He would stop at a village, maybe do a blood brother ceremony, give out some gifts, and then present the chief with a piece of paper.
Did the chiefs have any idea what they were signing?
Almost certainly not. They likely viewed these pieces of paper as treaties of friendship, or maybe simple trade agreements. Or perhaps they thought they were just giving Stanley the right to build a small house on their land. They certainly didn't understand they were signing over their sovereignty and granting monopoly trade rights to a king in Brussels they had never even heard of.
This is the map by treaty concept on an industrial scale.
It was industrial scale treaty making. Stanley signed over 400 of these treaties. He was building a state for Leopold, brick by brick, or rather paper by paper.
But Leopold wasn't the only player in the Congo Basin. He had a rival.
He did. A man named Savorgnan de Brassa.
I love the contrast between these two men. If Stanley is this brute force industrial machine, Brassa is, I don't know, he's like poetry.
He really was. Brassa was an Italian-born French naval officer. He was aristocratic, incredibly charming. He sometimes walked around barefoot. He hated violence. He believed in winning people over with diplomacy and respect. And he was exploring the same region, but for France.
And he was basically in a race with Stanley.
It was a race for control of the pool, what was then called Stanley Pool and is now Pool Malebo. It's this natural widening of the Congo River that acts as a gateway to the entire interior. Whoever controlled the pool controlled the trade of the whole Congo Basin.
And Brassa won the race.
He did. He took a different route, coming overland from Gabon. He arrived at the Congo River in 1880 before Stanley managed to get there. And there he found the Makoko.
And the Makoko is the title of the king of the Batek people, right?
Yeah.
Not his name.
Yes, that's right. The ruler was King Ilu. Brazza spent weeks with him. He didn't use force or trickery. He used charm and diplomacy. He convinced the Makoko that it would be in his interest to place his kingdom under the protection of France.
And this leads to the famous Makoko Treaty.
It's a small piece of paper that completely changed history. Brazza didn't have an army. He left behind one French sergeant and 2 Senegalese sailors to hold this vast new territory. But he had the signed paper.
And when he got back to Paris, the French government actually ratified it.
This was the bombshell. Up until 1882, the other European powers had been pretty skeptical about these kinds of treaties. They thought they were flimsy, maybe not legally binding. But when the French Parliament officially ratified the Brazza-Makoko Treaty, they were making a huge statement. They were saying, this piece of paper is legal, this territory is now ours.
It proved that the paper partition was now recognized international law.
And this panicked everyone. Leopold panicked because he thought France was about to steal his new Congo state. Portugal panicked because they had centuries-old claims to the Congo coast. Britain panicked because they didn't want France to have a massive protectionist empire right in the middle of Africa.
So suddenly, everyone is bumping into everyone else in a region nobody cared about 5 years earlier. The scramble is getting messy.
It was a powder keg. You have the French in Tunisia and now the Congo. The British stuck in Egypt. Leopold maneuvering in the middle, the Germans are watching from the sidelines. The possibility of a European war breaking out over a dispute in Africa was suddenly becoming very, very real.
And that really brings us to our conclusion. This is the moment that leads to the looming Berlin Conference.
Right. Bismarck, the puppet master in Berlin, looks at all this chaos and decides he needs to step in and set some rules for the game. He doesn't want a war in Europe to be caused by some argument over the Congo River. So he calls for a conference in Berlin in 1884.
Which we will definitely cover in our next deep dive. But just looking back at this starting gun period from about 1880 to 1884, what's the one thing that stands out to you?
For me, it's the total disconnect. We've spent this whole time talking about sovereign debt and Suez Canal shares and treaties and consular rivalries in Tunis. Almost none of this has anything to do with the reality of Africa or the people living there.
It's Europe solving its own internal problems, but on African soil.
Exactly. France took Tunisia to distract itself from its humiliation by Germany. Britain took Egypt to protect a canal that was vital for its Indian trade. Leopold took the Congo to satisfy his own personal ego and his bank account.
The people living there, the Tunisians, the Egyptians, the Sudanese, the Congolese, they were just pawns on a map being drawn thousands of miles away.
And the consequences were, of course, devastating. The debt trap in Tunisia and Egypt stripped those countries of their sovereignty for generations. The so-called philanthropy in the Congo would, in a few short years, turn into one of the most brutal and murderous regimes in human history.
It's a very sobering reminder that so much of history is made in these quiet rooms by men looking at maps, while the real price is paid by people they will never meet thousands of miles away.
And just the speed of it all. In 1880, Africa was largely free. By the time the Berlin Conference is over, the gates have slammed shut. The scramble wasn't marathon. It was a frantic, desperate sprint.
And that is where we will leave it for today. The scramble has begun. The players are on the board. Next time, we'll see how they carved up the rest of the cake. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Until next time.